Hello everybody and welcome to the webinar this month, the month of March, where we're going to chat to you a little bit about parenting, positive parenting. What does it look like? What does it look like in action at school, but also on home front? Because I think there's two sides to this. You know, we parents at school working with the students on a daily basis, but when our students actually go home, then they get to the real parents, and there we need to discuss and we need to look into elements of how the parents can parent in a positive way. What are the elements? And I'm very fortunate because I've got Dawes with me this month, and she is a head at one of our Crawford international schools, but she's also an expert in many fields, and particularly when it comes to parenting. She's got a huge educational psychology background, and we're very fortunate to chat to her today about that. So welcome, Di.
Thank you, Dr. Bock. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
So Di, I'm going to start straight away by asking you about positive parenting. What does it mean? What does it look like in your opinion, your expert's opinion? It's unprecedented times, obviously with COVID, and I think, you know, parents sometimes just need that extra bit of input from our side. So what does it look like, Di? What does positive parenting mean to you?
So, Dr. Bock, can I answer that question with a question first and ask you what roles you have to play in your life?
Yeah, so the kind of roles, you know, you're putting me on the spot here, but I love it and it's quite good. But, you know, the roles that I have to play in my life, first of all, I'm obviously leading a school, and I'm hoping that I'm doing a great job and leading it very successfully. But also, you know, I'm a parent, I'm a inspirational leader. I tap into a wider community out there. So yeah, there's quite a lot of things that I juggle at the same time. But I would say, you know, I'm at the heart, the core of everything, I'm also a dad.
So I set you up there because I asked about roles, and one of your roles was you're a dad. So I want to posit that parenting, positive parenting, is actually about relationship. It's not a role, it's a relationship. And that's often where we go wrong. We see it as a role instead of a relationship.
And that's so powerful because you're speaking about, you know, it being a relationship. And again, for me, that's now something new again, you know, because I would also view it as a role. You know, I've got my roles and responsibilities, not only from home front, but obviously my responsibility would be to my children, to make sure that, you know, I deposit well there. But you speaking about the relationship, Di, can you just unpack it for me a little bit more?
So for me, I have a model, a picture in my mind that I work with. So I have a rectangle, and at the top I've got positive parenting, and down the one side relationship, down the other side communication, and at the bottom I feel valued, I feel acknowledged, I'm heard, I'm important. So what I do is I try to keep everything within that frame. So the frame is always, my communication is always about keeping the relationship, and the way to keep the relationship is to ensure that the other is heard, acknowledged, validated, that they're important, and that they know that they're important.
Oh wow! In terms of you speaking about you know, them being heard, I want to stop there for a minute. So how do you view communication here, Di? Is communication important? How do we hear? How do our parents hear their children? You know, they're having an outcry, or they needing our attention. How do they hear this from us?
Okay, so I also work with another model, and that's the Gordon model, where you've got who owns the problem. Does the child own the problem? Is there no problem? Does the parent own the problem? Do both people own the problem? And that's kind of the beginning. So let's say, for example, can we go back to when you were 4 years old? And let's say you were building a tower, and you built this magnificent tower. You're really, really proud of it. It's tall. You spent a long time doing it. Everything's balanced well, and somebody comes past and knocks it over. Now, there are all these feelings bubbling up inside. Remember, 4-year-olds feel very intensely. Yeah. So feelings of frustration, of anger, of upset, it's unfair. And then an adult comes along, gets down to eye level, makes contact with you, eye contact with you. You feel that the body is regulated. You feel that their breathing is regulated. And the person says to you, honey, what happened? Do you want to talk about it? And there you just let the child lean in You hold the child and the child can lean in and those feelings bubble up. And then a short while later, the child can get on with building their Lego blocks. So the reason that this is important is that the landscape, the current psychological landscape or mental health landscape in South Africa is looking quite dismal. SADAG in 2019, so SADAG is the South African Depression and Anxiety group of South Africa. They said that 1 in 6 people are experiencing anxiety, depression, or some kind of substance use. And we're not talking about people who've got a bipolar or schizophrenia or a specific problem. These are just ordinary people. So specialists in the field are saying that it's because children haven't grown up understanding emotional literacy. They don't feel heard, they don't feel validated. So as parents, what we tend to do is correct, is find a solution, is explain, instead of allowing the child to be in that space, just to be held and just to have that space. So emotional literacy is really, really important.
So what I can establish already there, Di, I actually had goosebumps when you mentioned the fact that, you know, we need to, it's almost like you're trying to create a picture where we need to go to the level of the child, where they feel comfortable to find us and where we can find them, and also this, you know, creating a platform, because I never really knew about, you know, the fact that you need to get to the child's level, you can bend your knees a little bit, you're making eye contact, you breathing properly, so it's almost like you're setting a tone. So I wanted you to just unpack that for me a little bit more. Do you think that's quite important when it comes to positive parenting?
Very important. So I'm talking about a little child. When it's a teenager, let's say a teenager has got a problem, you're going to possibly want to just sit with the teenager, just be present, not demand, but just listen. There's part of listening is silence, and silence is also a language, and sometimes teenagers just need to know that you are there, that you are available. So I didn't get to communication, but I will get to that. We established that parenting is about relationship. So relationship is built on trust. Do you agree with that statement?
I agree 100%.
So it's been very well documented that trust is made up of 3 components. There's authenticity, empathy, and logic. So where trust wobbles, where the relationship wobbles, where trust wobbles, the advice is to find out where it's wobbling. So if a child, a teenager, another person has a problem, that's where you are going to go into active listening. You're going to listen, you're going to allow the person the space. That is our biggest wobble at the moment. And the reason is that we are so distracted as people. Our society is very, very busy. We're juggling all of these roles that we spoke about earlier. Work is demanding, home life is demanding. So it's the time that it takes. So we're a parent, we're a child, where a teenager has a problem, we need to listen. Don't judge. Don't give solutions. Don't try and fix it. Just hold that space. Allow the person to be in that space and find their own solutions. Our biggest distraction here, I believe, is the cell phone. We need to be present. So even though we are, as a society, we're becoming better at practicing things like mindfulness, vulnerability, compassion, empathy, gratefulness, I think we need to look at active listening. Be there for the other. Let them talk. Give them the time and space to work out their own problem.
Yeah, very powerful there, Di. And once again, you know, it insinuates the fact that we need to create that pocket or that opportunity, whether it's, you know, we need to make the time during our busy schedules and busy days to actually make sure that we listen, we creating that environment. And it obviously, from what I could gather from what you were saying, especially with somebody like a 4-year-old, is creating that safe space for them to feel comfortable, and, you know, you create that opportunity for them to express to you in some way or form. But you know, you mentioned the busyness. Parents are busy; they never have the time. For our parents, how can they find time? How do they know? What are the signs where they actually need to say to themselves, listen, I need to slow down and I need to make time because there's a situation brewing here. Any tips there, Di?
So I think the thing is being in tune, again, going back to the relationship, being in tune with the teenager or the child in the home, seeing if they are holding back. So there are 3 typical ways that we manage our feelings. And the first one is we repress them. So we just go into that quiet space, we repress. The problem is that as adults, those come up again when anything similar, any situation that is similar to something you experienced in childhood comes up. You go back into those patterns of suppressing and repressing your feelings. The other one is you can go into aggression. And that's where you have where you can become super critical of yourself, critical of others. You move into loud speaking and so on. That's often when you haven't been able to, when you haven't been acknowledged, when your feelings haven't been acknowledged and you haven't been able to express them. They are still there. The best way is to make a space where children feel that they are welcome as they are. So the angry bits, the sad bits, the happy bits, the messy bits, the not so good bits, that you are accepted as you are. It doesn't mean that you can be rude or difficult or objectionable, but you are still accepted and your feelings are validated.
Yeah, very powerful there, Di, and I want to stop a bit and unpack it a little bit more with you. So, you know, children usually they tend to shy away, or they would hide away. Actually, even if they're at home, if there's a particular matter that they're struggling with, they actually don't want the parents to notice or to ask. But again, there you mentioning relationships to me, and that's you know, got me thinking. How do you what do you think about, you know, the relationship between like, for example, myself, you know, I'm only a dad of girls, between myself and my girls, in order to pick up that there's something wrong, to sense that there's something wrong. So we spoke about relationships. Do you think, you know, there's quite a strong power in that, in terms of, you know, being able to identify and to pick up if something does go wrong?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, again, going back to the Gordon model, where we talk about who owns the problem. Yeah. So if the child owns the problem, be available, be ready to listen. Be there so that they are willing and able to speak to you. And that builds on the relationship. So again, if I go back to trust, trust is made up of, so the 3 components of trust are your empathy, your authenticity, being authentic, and logic. So if we go into the empathy, we've spoken about that, just allow the person to listen. And then logic, this is where we come to the communication. So there are 2 things about logic. One is your logic can be faulty, and that's another whole discussion in itself, and it's actually worth looking at, because faulty logic does get in the way of trust. The other is, let's say your logic is sound, but the way you communicate it is not received by the other person. So for example, if your little one comes to you and says she doesn't want to do her homework now, and you say, go and do your homework now, because if you don't do your homework now, you're not going to learn, and if you're not going to learn, you're not going to do well in tests, and if you're not going to do well in tests, you're not going to pass well enough to get into the university of your choice, and then you won't be able to get the job that you want, so go and do your homework. Now that's quite logical in a way. It's logical, but it doesn't make sense to, let's say your daughter is 9. It is so far removed from her experience that it makes no sense. But if you said, go and do your homework now so that I can help mum prepare dinner, and then we've got a little bit of extra time to play before you go to bed. That makes sense. Then it's short, it's crisp. So if there's a logic wobble, so in other words, you've got a problem as a parent and you want to change behavior in a child, That's when you're going to need to have influence. You said you're an influential leader. You need to be an influence as a parent. You can either exercise control or you can exercise influence. If you want to be influential, then what you need to do is communicate in such a way that you maintain the relationship, that the child is heard and acknowledged, and you say what you need to say clearly. So if you think in communication, there are two basic ways that we communicate. The one is the person who's speaking takes you on this marvelous journey with drama and detours and picturesque language, tells you a story and ultimately gets to the point. That's one way. And the world's best, some of the world's best communicators are actually storytellers, use this narrative style. Yeah. But if you've got a problem, it's not the one to use now. Then you need to have short, clear, precise. Yes. You need to be able to say exactly what you want done. You need to be careful of criticism, of judgment, of moralizing, yes, of preaching, of teaching. Now we as teachers go into teaching mode very, very quickly. Yeah. This is not the time. Yeah. There's another time for that, but not now. So you need to be able to establish, what is it that I want? You need to interrogate quite carefully. What is it that you want and why do you want that behavior? And then communicate that clearly.
It's really powerful because even just the way you're breaking it down for me, I mean, for me it's very insightful. So I'm sure for the parent community out there, this must be very insightful because, you know, usually we've got this long discussion, we're not clear, we're not concise, and we really don't know what we want out of the conversation. And most of the time is if they did something wrong or it's something that we're uncomfortable about, we criticize immediately. I would have done it this way, or, you know, you've got a think time, or it's time out, but we never just sit and listen. And the one thing that I really like about what you've said was the fact that silence can also be communication. Silence can be an answer. And sometimes, especially with the teenagers, all they want is for you to sit there and listen and be present. I think that came out very strong for me because sometimes, you know, we are there, but we're also not there. We are distracted by our phones. We are distracted by our to-do lists, especially as parents. So what you've said was quite profound for me, you know, that finding that time. And when you take out that time, you're present in the moment, because that is something that I think is very important just through the discussion that we're having.
So the third one that we need to look at is authenticity. So the authenticity is one of the most troubling because we need to be authentic as parents, and to be authentic in our communication with our children, we need to actually know exactly who we are. And we need to be comfortable who we are. So with so many different parenting views and views of what's right and what's wrong, it's confusing both for parents and it's confusing for children. So in my home, my husband grew up in a very authoritarian home. I grew up in a very laissez-faire home. So I really believe that in parenting and teaching, they're very similar in that if you want to parent, if you need to really consider exactly what it is that you want, where you want to go. You have to know what your end game is so that you parent intentionally and consciously. Otherwise, you're going to fall back into patterns. I don't know if you've ever said to yourself, I'm never going to be like my dad.
Yes.
And then you hear yourself, you're exactly like your dad. Yeah. And that's because of the imprinting. We need to start establishing patterns purposefully. And that's where the authenticity comes along. So to get back to my husband and I, there was a time with the teenagers where they knew that I didn't agree with what Dad was saying. But we had made a decision in our home that we were going to follow what Dad said, or we just chose who was going to have the veto vote. But I never ever pretended that I agreed with the veto vote, but in order to create harmony, we had to agree to go with it. So we agreed to disagree. And I think that's important. We try to pretend that we're on the same page. It's not necessary, particularly teenagers. They can sniff out when you are not being authentic. Yeah.
I think again there for me, Di, what's interesting is when you speak about the authenticity. I think, again, parents, you know, sometimes they're so rushed, they think they're just making a quick decision, they're just giving quick advice, but, you know, they're not authentic, and they might do it the way that a friend would do it, or their parents. Because for me as well, I mean, it's a reflection opportunity for me, because so many times we say, I would never do it the way my mum did it or my dad, but we end up doing it anyway because it's just a quick fix. This will never be allowed, and this is how we do it. But I think, again, you're speaking about, you know, it not being authentic. And I think for parents, it's good to know again, you know, that sometimes we're trying to mirror or copy something or from somebody else, and that's why it might not have such a positive effect. Because remember, we're speaking here about positive parenting, and it can actually have a negative impact or an effect. I love the fact that you're speaking about, you know, you and your husband standing together, but also not pretend that, you know, it's okay. You agree to disagree, but that's the decorum that you guys are obviously going to follow within your home. And I think that's also can contribute to positive parenting, because ultimately it makes it authentic, it makes the situation real. There's no pretense, and it doesn't mean because you're disagreeing that you are not agreeing at the same time. And that's just sort of the rule or the decorum that you're following in your home. So very powerful there as well. So Di, I hear from our discussion that communication is key. It's key in terms of positive relationships, especially us as parents. But we find so many parents asking about communication, especially with their teenagers, because it is a difficult age. And I know that sometimes they struggle to get through to them, communicate with them. Any tips or tricks that you've got for our parents, especially if they've got teenagers? How can they break that barrier? How can they start communicating a little bit more effectively? Or what do you have up your sleeve for them that you can share today with us?
So I think the first thing is that it's never too late to fix, to repair, and to go back to those three components: empathy, logic, authenticity. If you find out where the wobble is, which one of those has gone wrong, are you not spending time? Are you not listening to the child? Are you not logical and out of reach of the child in the way you communicate, or are you inauthentic? Those are three things. And then keep the frame in mind all the time. Underneath, at the bottom, which holds the whole frame together, is I feel validated, I feel understood, I feel heard, and then you've got relationship and communication. So I try to keep everything in that frame. So with teenagers, often it comes when we've both got a problem, and that is when the parent and teenager are disagreeing. There could be a values conflict, or there could just be a conflict in the way we want to behave. So it's that conflict. So I would suggest you use I messages, not you messages. I feel frustrated when you leave your clothes on the floor and don't put them in the wash basket, because it means that I have to pick them up and it wastes my time. So there, I've given three components. I've said my feeling, I've explained the behavior, and I have explained the effect of the behavior. Then as you give the I messages, as soon as a teenager becomes defensive, shift gear and move back into listening. So the teenager might then say, yes, but it's not fair because my brother is allowed to, or I haven't got time, or I have to do sport and I have to make my own sandwiches. And then you're picking up that the child is overloaded. Then you move back into active listening. You listen. You hear the child, you give the nods, you ask, you try to clarify where the child is at. Then you go back to, I'm frustrated. Is there a way around? Can we work out a solution that works for you and for me? So the point is that we have to have harmony in the home. And we can't allow teenagers or little ones to rule the roost, because we're all important. So it's important that everybody's needs are met and everybody's needs are clarified. So again, we have to work out, what are the needs? Is it really important that the bedroom is tidy? If it is important, then you have to work through it. If in your home it's not important, then look at the things that are important. So I would say choose your battles, work out what's important, and what's important in one home might not be important in another home. But choose your battles and hear the child.
I like that I method that you're introducing here, but I wanted to ask you, Di, does it work both ways? Because, you know, as parents, sometimes we don't want to hear from our children. It's almost like I said and what I said is the law. Would you recommend that it goes both ways? Our teenage daughter can, for example, say to us that, but I also don't like the fact that you were late picking me up because I was then in the rain and etc. etc. So that communication can actually become more stronger, and it can actually lead to quite a very positive relationship, because just the way you're logically breaking it down, for me, it makes sense to me, because I mean you're actually very clear and concise about, you know, what makes you unhappy and the effects that it can have on the household, because we all want harmony in our respective households. So would you say it goes both ways?
Absolutely. So relationship is never one-sided. So it's relationship, so it is both-sided, and the needs of the parents must be met. So one of the other very helpful tools is there are always three people or three things involved in a relationship. It's you, it's the other person, and it's the environment. So we remember the environment when we've got a toddler. We put things high up, we move things around, but sometimes we forget about the environment as a teenager. So teenagers, we must also look at the environment for them. They might need a space where they can play their loud music, for example, where it is not interfering. They might need a space where they have their friends, where they can be themselves with their friends, which is not encroaching on the rest of the family. So the space, the environment is also important. I just recall a parent coming to see me the other day, and she used one of my methods of the active listening. A child had said to her, I hate you, mommy, I don't want you to be my mommy anymore, I want to go to my nana, I want her to be my mommy. Yeah. And the mom was very, very brave. It took a lot of courage. After she had cried herself and cried and settled herself, she went back and she listened to the child. And then the child went to bed, and she phoned me that night and she said, Di, my child feels fine, but I still feel absolutely awful. Right. I'm not resolved because my child said that he doesn't want me to be his mum. Yeah. So that's where you need to go to the next step. So the next step is to say to the child, when you say, etc., this is how it makes me feel. So in other words, you are building the relationship both ways. Same as a parent, if I have a headache, my level of tolerance is going to be far lower than if I don't have a headache. So if I communicate to the children beforehand, oh, I've got such a headache today, sorry, I might not be able to listen to you. You've established that ground. You've told the child. I think that's all part of what a relationship should be.
Yeah, and again, very powerful, and the same would apply to, like, you know, I'm a bit exhausted, can we have this conversation in the morning or another time? So there's understanding, and again, it comes back to that logic. And, you know, for me, like sitting here and reflecting, it's like we're taking it for granted, but it is actually important to communicate concisely, and there must be logic, and that's the authenticity that you spoke about. You know, as parents, we need to be authentic in our approach, the way we communicate, and also the way that we want to create that harmony within the household. So I think it is very, very powerful. Di, before you go, because I know we're running out of time, speak to me a little bit about temper tantrums, you know, the little ones, you know, throwing a tantrum, because that's also all about relationships and communication, and starting to look at fixing it and to get it to a better level. And you know, sometimes those happen. They always speak about the terrible twos, but I think there's a terrible in every age group and year group. So yeah, can you share a little bit about you know, these temper tantrums that our parents might be struggling with?
Yes. So I said earlier on that silence is a language. I think we must look at behavior is also a language. Yes. So a temper tantrum is usually, in a 2-year-old, it's usually because they don't have the language, they're frustrated. There might be manipulation, And I think all little children are master manipulators, and we have to work out which is what. But I would recommend that you start using feeling language. So you start saying to the child, I know that you're frustrated because you want the biscuit, and Mum said you can't have it, but after supper, perhaps you can. Or you've already had a biscuit today, and I don't want you to have too many because too much sugar is not good for you. I don't want to go into too much lecturing there. I must be careful of that one. But just giving a quick example. So we're not giving in to the temper tantrums, but I think teenagers also have their temper tantrums. We don't call it that, but they're also going through pruning. All sorts of things is happening in the brain. There's a lot of physiological stuff, if I can use that word, that's happening, and one has to understand the other person. So just like you would with a friend, you understand where the other person is coming from. Doesn't mean that you accept bad behavior, but it does mean that you're coming in with an understanding. So there are certain strategies to use for temper tantrums. Sometimes one has to ignore them and let them work their way out. Sometimes you need to distract the child. Sometimes you need to move them from one activity to another, which is another kind of distraction. I think the thing to remember always that emotions are intense in little children, but they also move from one emotion to another very quickly. So they can move from being very, very frustrated to laughing in the space of a second. And that is how they are. So don't be too concerned about the temper tantrum. Unfortunately, one does have to ride them. If they continue for too long, I would say seek the advice of a professional, because they do need to be managed carefully. A lot has to do with temperament.
Okay. Right, and I'm sure that you will agree with me that, you know, a reminder for parents again that, you know, we in control, so, and we want to have that harmony in our household, so it would be important for us to come up with a distraction, to listen, to try and calm the situation down, because once again we're in control. They always speak about, you know, sometimes, you know, when you're at an event, then the friends would look and they would say like, ooh, this child is ruling this household. But in actual fact, sometimes it's just a joke, but in actual fact it is important for the parents once again to be reminded that we're usually in control, so we would be the instigator of, you know, distracting, or the instigator of creating a calm space and environment for them to talk then, or to find out what the problem is. So I'm sure you're agreeing with me that, you know, the parents need to be reminded that we're in control of the space.
And I think also, just to pick up on what you were saying about at a party and somebody looking at another child, I think we do have to be aware of the fact that it's important socially that children are taught how to behave well and how to behave properly, because social interaction is compromised if children are allowed to behave badly. But on the other hand, we need to be careful when we judge. I remember very much the story in, I think it's Steve Covey's book, where he says he was on a train and his 3 children were running wild, and he seemed to be completely distracted, and eventually one of the other passengers said very, very frustratedly that he needs to control his children, and he kind of got out of his reverie and said, I'm really, really sorry. They've just lost their mum, and I'm taking them to their granny so that I can go and identify the body. We never know what is happening in someone else's home, so we've got to be very, very careful with looking on the outside and judging, particularly when it's got to do with how children behave.
Yeah, and that again is so profound, and I'm happy that you brought it up, because, you know, sometimes when we actually go to a social gathering, it would also be as a result of, you know, wanting to get the children out of the house, wanting them to give them a bit more freedom, socializing with their friends, so they might actually act up, you know, and out of character, or they're super excited or they're overcompensating because they haven't seen their friends or other people for a long time. So I'm happy that you bring that up, because it is just a reminder for us once again to have that conversation with our children, you know, socially when we go out, what would be the sort of norms for us as a family, for how to behave out there, but also just to recognize the fact that, you know, every household is different, every child is different, circumstances might be different. And I think the fact that you brought it up was very powerful, because it is a great reminder for all of us just listening to it.
And one of the pillars of resilience, so we really know in the world today we need resilience. One of the pillars of resilience is knowing how to behave and when to behave, knowing what to do.
Wow.
So what you said about preparing the children beforehand, this is what I expect of you, is really important.
So Di, we're completely out of time, but you know, we've had such a great discussion, and again, there's so many things that stood out for me, you know, about the communication, the authenticity, the fact that, you know, we need to be clear and concise, that positive parenting is built on relationships, and I think that was a key one that stood out for me. And sometimes, you know, we do not communicate logically, but I mean, you've shared some tips and tricks with regards to that. Silence is an answer, silence is a form of communication, and also the importance of us as parents just to create that pocket and that environment to communicate effectively, and all these things can contribute to positive parenting. So I want to thank you for that. And before you go, Di, I just want you to tell our audience and our parents out there just one closing message, and maybe you can just share with them, you know, that you know, life does happen, we relate with them, things do happen, but also the importance of, you know, them just staying and keeping their hand on the pulse continuously. So is there anything you want to share with our parent community before we say goodbye to them?
Yes, I think just the fact that we are human, and that successful parenting looks as though it's a nice straight line, but actually it's a mush in the middle. And just to remind you of the frame. Positive parenting, the bottom holding it all together. I feel valued, I feel acknowledged, I'm heard, I'm validated as a person, relationships and communication. So all your communication is keeping in line that I want to have that relationship intact.
Wow, that's awesome. Di, I want to thank you for your time. It's been invaluable, such an insightful conversation. And to our parents out there in the community listening, I just want to say to you that this initiative that was instigated by Crawford International Schools is coming directly to your home, just to support you with parenting, with positive parenting, with the well-being of yourself and your family. And I'm hoping that this is going to add value to your lives as well. So yeah, from us here at Crawford International, I'm going to say goodbye. And I also would like to remind you, it doesn't cost us anything to be kind to one another. So from us here, I'm wishing you a beautiful week ahead, and we'll chat to you next month again. Ciao, everybody.